Did you know, according to the National Center of Education Statistics, hate crime on college campuses has increased 40% between 2011 and 2019? My name's Acasio. Thank you very much for tuning into USF News. I'll be reporting on racial discrimination among college students with Caitlin, Mickey, and Raquel. Today, we're first going to cover the foundation of racial discrimination and how it shows up on college campuses. Then, we're going to move on to what causes it and explore what groups exist to fight the issue on college campuses. Finally, we'll wrap up with art and artists who use their creative platforms to advocate and raise awareness on racial discrimination. Let's get started. Now I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin.
Thank you, Acasio. Similar to the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg, we can ask, what came first, race or racism? Let's explore by first defining each. I'm Caitlin, coming to you live from rainy Portland, Oregon. I'll be talking to you about the history of racial discrimination and how it has been ingrained in society through systematic institutions. Then, I will demonstrate how discrimination has found its way onto our education systems. I'm going to first define race and racism to be able to explain the systematic qualities of racial discrimination. Finally, I will cover specific examples of racial discrimination on college campuses. Race and racism are deeply rooted in American history. So let's get started to understand why each plays such a huge role in society. Race can be defined as a social construct that artificially divides people into distinct groups based on certain characteristics such as physical appearance, particularly skin color, ancestral heritage, cultural affiliation, cultural history, and ethnic classification. While racism means the systematic subordination of members of targeted racial groups who have relatively little social power in the United States, for example, Blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, and Asians, by the members of the Asian racial group who have relatively more social power, white people. This subordination is supported by the actions of individuals, cultural norms, values, institutional structures, and practices of society. So, we can understand that racism is born of race because without the labeling characteristics of race, there would be no platform for racism to operate upon. Moving further, we can understand how racial discrimination is prominent in American society today as a result of the systematic qualities of institutions and practices that have repeatedly shown up in history since the first slave ship washed up on American shores in 1619. The cycle of racism is sustained and practiced in 1890 to the Wounded Knee Massacre, to Japanese internment in 1942, to MLK's assassination in 1968, to Trump's comment just last week naming COVID-19 as the Chinese virus. It is for these reasons why we see hate crimes and racial discrimination showing up on college campuses across the globe. The killing of African-American Lieutenant Michael Collins just 3 days before his graduation at Bowie State University was just one hate crime out of the 280 cases reported on college campuses in 2017, according to FBI data. Additionally, nearly 60% of campus hate crimes reported to the FBI in 2017 involved vandalism and destruction of property. This includes our own USF community, where just a few weeks ago swastikas were reportedly found painted on our campus. The U.S. Department of Justice Office of Justice Programs recommends every campus and the municipal police department with colleges located within its jurisdiction should consider appointing at least one officer, preferably two, to serve as the designated civil rights officer. Further, campus security officers should all be required to have proper training to deal with hate crimes and racial discrimination so that every student feels safe and secure. We observe instances of hate, discrimination, and even violence because of the history that has made such acts permissible through reoccurring and systematic institutions of racism. So, I remind everyone to think about the social construct of racism that we have created throughout history, which means that we can work to dismantle and deconstruct this practice because anything that is created can be destroyed. That's all for today. Back to you, Acasio.
Thank you, Caitlin. That was great. I already feel more educated to be able to combat racial discrimination. Now let's hear it from Mickey down in sunny San Diego. Implicit bias from professor institutional bias. Basis between students.
Thanks, Acasio. No college campus across the globe is safe from the presence of racial discrimination, including our own. So it is reasonable to explore what causes instances of hate and racism. I'm Mickey, and I'll be talking about what causes racial discrimination on college campuses. and what organizations exist to combat the presence of racism among college students. First, I'll explain how minorities are already disadvantaged in education systems based on a history of cultural inferiority to white people, and then how this inequality affects a minority's experience on a college campus. To wrap up, I will point out a few resources to combat the inequality of racial discrimination. Universities often market diverse campuses as a selling point, but it seems as though campuses haven't exactly accommodated their resources towards achieving diversity. An associate professor of African American Studies and Educational Policy at the University of Illinois at Chicago discusses how the discourse around the academic survival of Black students and their experiences on predominantly white campuses often fails to analyze the effects of societal racism on their mental health. So the combination of physiological and emotional energy required to manage stress in academic and social contexts in conjunction with racism can be overwhelming and excessively taxing compared to that of white students. This means white students already have an edge over minority students who try extra hard to prove their competence because of our history that paints minorities as lesser. It is a constant struggle of trying to prove worthiness in institutions. When minorities are constantly treated as inferior, it is likely to have a negative effect on performance. There are many other causes of racial discrimination on college campuses. White students often avoid minorities in classrooms or study groups and are often left out of student networks like sharing notes or old exams, which has a disproportionate effect on student success. Moreover, professors may hesitate to advise minority students against dropping classes that may cause them to fail in an attempt to dodge a racist label. Black students often experience institutional racism on predominantly white campuses that provide standardized tests that Black individuals score lower than white individuals, which weighs heavily on the admission process in addition to rising admission costs and decreases of financial aid. Finally, some minority students have trouble locating minority faculty on campus, where white professors may be unaware and insensitive to their needs. All these examples result in a disproportionate college experience as compared to white students and contribute to the underlying cause of racial discrimination. For all these reasons, there are groups both locally and around the nation to fight racial discrimination on college campus. USF offers cultural centers for students to build and explore social issues and identity. We also offer international student services and clubs such as African American Student Union and Kesamahan for students to gather and share heritage. Additionally, the Steve Fund is the only national support service working to support young people of color on college campuses. Multicultural mental health professionals deliver on-campus programs and services, as well as tech services to aid in youth mental health. So for all these reasons, we see that campuses often fall short when meeting the needs of minority students, who are often already disadvantaged on predominantly white campuses. However, there are resources to make sure these students feel safe and welcomed. There are many reasons why needs and accommodations for minorities are overlooked in the school system, but at the same time, there are services and communities that exist to fight this inequality. Let's all do our part to create a campus that's open and safe for all people. Now we're going to take a more intimate look into members of specific communities who are affected by racial discrimination at USF by including statements from students.
Just by looking at me, tell me my values, my beliefs, who I respect, who I trust. You can't. In a similar way, minorities are so much more than their race, but they are discriminated against for a fragment of who they are as a whole. These other aspects of their identity affect how they experience racial discrimination. We are going to share how these intersectionalities affect students who experience racism. Today, we'll focus on how race intersects with nationality, gender, and sexual identity.
Our first demographic is going to be on international students. International students have often shrunken from others of fear of being belittled or mocked. Students from other countries come to USF for many reasons: to escape an unsafe environment of their homeland, to find a better education, or as well as better career opportunities. But most of them sacrifice the comfort of their friends and family and familiarity to be able to come to USF. To make things worse, they find themselves even more alone when people mock their accents and unfairly assign them negative traits and habits. As our first example, a first-year Burmese student reported that he's often felt misunderstood and stereotyped. I don't know a lot of people from Burma. A lot of people don't try to get to know me. Some people laugh at me on how I pronounce things, and they think I smoke just because other international students smoke around school.
Unfortunately, international students aren't the only community that have felt isolated. All genders face unique challenges of their own due to how society perceives their gender in conjunction with their race. In 2017, the National Survey of Life conducted a study that found that dark-skinned women experienced higher levels of microaggression and discrimination and have worse mental health than their light-skinned counterparts. One female African-American student shared, "This guy straight up told me he doesn't like dark-skinned girls. I was shocked that he just said that and expected me and my friends to not have a problem with it."
The stress of navigating life is often amplified by the overlapping issues associated with different parts of an individual's identity. In addition to the adversity they face as a minority person, queer people of color are further oppressed by the negative ways society often perceives their sexuality. In 2009, 85 people participated in a study by the Human Rights Foundation campaign to assess the challenges in the lives of LGBTQ people of color. One survey found that 61% of participants were discriminated against due to their race, and 50% were discriminated against due to their sexuality. A first-year student of color expressed how society has conditioned her to be cautious because of the coronavirus pandemic. Right now, it's never been more difficult to be Asian and bi. At least I can protect myself by hiding one of those things.
While we've heard some insight into struggles of those discriminated against, too many voices are left out in the conversation. That is why spreading awareness of the issue is important. To hear more on that, let's hear from Raquel, coming to you locally from Richmond.
Thanks, Acacio. Now, in the face of violence and hate, you may think that an illustration or a song or a photo leaves us defenseless, but artistic expression is essential to our survival. Today, I'm going to be sharing a few examples of how racial discrimination is voiced in the arts. Beyonce, Patrick Martinez, and Lisa Woolrim-Schoblam have all used their unique talents to advocate for minority victims of abuse. Our first artist is a goddess among us, known for her powerful vocals, stellar performance, and so much more, including activism. Beyonce used this stage to spread awareness of issues of racial discrimination. In 2016, she came out with Formation, and her music video included images of her standing on top of a sinking police car. She performed this song in an X formation wearing black leather at the Super Bowl. Her music video illustrated the lives of black women as they championed against their oppressors during social justice movements such as Black Lives Matter. And the theme of her performance at the Super Bowl was a testament to Malcolm X, leader of the Black Panthers. Next up, Las Kazé, an author for the New York Times, chose to feature an artist in her article who spreads his message without backup dancers and black heels. Using his talents in neon and photography, Patrick Martinez addresses the hardships of immigrants. He calls out Immigration and Customs Enforcement, a federal agency notorious for unwarranted harassment and abuse of immigrants. Martinez begs for social reform and empathy in order to undo the stigma of immigrants and the pattern of blame placed on them for high crime rates and lack of employment opportunities. In a similar way, Alexandra, writer for KQED, showcased an artist who uses their social media platform to defend members of the Asian community. Lisa Woolrim-Schoblam illustrated a 15-year-old Singaporean girl's experience riding on the train in response to the xenophobia coinciding with the coronavirus pandemic. In her caption, the Korean artist relayed multiple horrifying experiences of members of the Asian community who were unjustly and publicly shamed. Schoblam also expressed disbelief at abusers racing to say they're not racist, disguising their actions as taking measures towards personal safety. If you are one of the poor souls who feel the need to punch an Asian lady in the face just because she sneezed in order to feel safe, then I'll leave you with a few words of advice from Schoblam herself. If you don't want to come across as racist, don't act racist. Beyonce, Patrick Martinez, and Lisa Woolrim-Schoblam have all used different mediums to suppress further racial discrimination. Now, while these artists may only create for a lifetime, the impact of their art in society will persist infinitely afterwards. It has the power to inspire and recruit new advocates for social justice that will spur the positive change we need to see in the world. So even during tragic times, don't ever feel inhibited to create, because that is when we will need it the most.
To wrap it all up, let's reflect on how we can make our campus safe and welcoming for all students of all races and backgrounds, and work on dismantling systemic racism. Remember, racism is a social construct that was created, and anything that was created can also be destroyed. A practice that we can see through the groups of individuals who advocate for equality for all. That's all for today's broadcast. Stay safe and please stay at home, everybody. Thanks for listening.